significant event at that event. So I will call this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I'm going to do a roll call, please.
Hollers, Deacon,
Here.
Hensley,
Present.
Lester,
Here.
Neely,
Here.
Schwartz,
Here.
Spencer, Spicer, Wiseman, Wright.
Here.
We have a quorum.
I think we finished up the phone,
Okay.
so she'll be in a second. I hope. So now we're on to just committee discussion of the budget, and my understanding is Ms. Perry and Chief Schofield may have a topic to address at the top of the meeting. Is that right?
We have two topics, and so I passed out handouts to everyone. I'd like to actually start with the first page of the handout that you have. So there have been some questions in regards to the fund balance figures that I presented at Tuesday's council meeting in regards to the 10.6% projection, and Councilman Allers at that time asked if we had ever been that low in the projection. And I believe my answer at the time was I don't think that we ever have been. So I'd like to call some attention to some items that we probably need to add for context. So what you have before you on the first page is scenario number 1 is exactly what I presented to you at Tuesday's council meeting during the financial reports. This, in my mind, and also I think the chief would agree, is probably a worst case scenario. And it is one-sided because it reflects additional expenses that are highlighted in yellow, but it does not reflect any additional revenue. So it presents things also that have previously not been presented to council up to this point in an effort to be more comprehensive and more transparent. We're attempting to provide you more information. So I'd like to note that this is no different than past years have been when we have requested supplementals. These same scenarios were taking place behind the scenes, and staff was working the issues. So the supplementals had not been presented previously in previous fiscal years. Had they been, this same scenario would have played out. So,
Sheila, when you're saying the supplementals, you're talking about current fiscal year supplementals that are anticipated while we're discussing the next fiscal year's proposed budget.
correct. So supplementals for the health insurance shortfall, supplementals for any accounts that within each department we're having a shortfall for whatever reason. All of these things would have gone on behind the scenes previously, and we wouldn't have discussed them during the budget process. They would have come up afterwards. So presented in this manner, the exact same thing would have been the case in prior years as well. And to be honest, it could have been worse than the 10.6. Scenario number 2 kind of puts things in perspective, I think, by including all of the items. If you're going to include the additional potential expenses, you also need to include additional potential revenues. So what's different here is in scenario number 2, we have removed the items that were in yellow. Everything that was a double asterisk, staff feels that they will be able to cover with savings within the departments. This is the goal. We believe it's achievable, but that requires everybody working on the same goal to achieve it. The mayor, the council, division directors, department directors, everyone's got to be working towards the same goal. I have a note here, Chief, as to whether or not you'd like to talk about the use of vacancy savings at this point.
Yes, I would, and I really think Sheila's done a good job of kind of setting the stage and then also conveying, the staff mindset at this point in the budget cycle. As we approach the end of the year, there has always been, and I'll say even more so this year, a focus of controlling cost, moving funds around to cover certain items. One of the things that we always talk about, or have historically talked about this time of year, is the use of vacancy savings within the personnel services line item or group of line items. As a department director, historically in the last 8 years that I've been a part of it, and with my own budget, we would typically come to finance and we would ask for kind of an estimate, assistance with how much money we might have left in our personnel services category. And so for a larger department like the fire department, it could be due to different things. It could be due to, retirements and filling positions. It could be due to changes in various healthcare configurations and different things that are all part of personnel services. I would then go to the city administrator and I would make my request. I would say, hey, I have a few items that I did not get funded. Usually for me, for fairly small items, I can think of examples of a couple thermal imaging cameras or maybe a replacement of a utility trailer, a few things like that. And I would make my case that I think I have money left in personnel services as we get close to the end of the year. And then the city administrator would either approve or deny that request based on their assessment as well as finance's estimate. And so what I'm going to say at this point is that was the past practice. And that may very well be a future practice. But for this year, it's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because we are tighter this year in my assessment than we have been in the past. And we also know we have this looming, very large health insurance issue we've got to address. So there will be no approvals from the city administrator in terms of spending any of those vacancy savings dollars at the end of the budget cycle. And so not saying that it was right or wrong, but the other thing we have to remember too is this is the first year where we have both new collective bargaining agreements in place with the public safety sales tax, and there are still some unknowns with how that's going to fully impact the overall budget and the general fund. And so for a lot of reasons, I won't be approving any end of the year budget movement out of personnel services into whatever requests are made by department directors. So that's just kind of giving you a behind the curtain look at why and maybe why we think we can get pretty close. And then I'll hand it back to Sheila to kind of talk about what that looks like.
And one more thing in regards to that, the financial policy states that it is the responsibility of the city administrator and the finance director to come back to council with a plan on how we're going to meet the 17% fund balance goal. I think one of the things that the chief and I have talked about is that we clearly have a new city administrator coming in, and we don't necessarily think that it's fair for us to make a bigger deficit for him to have to deal with, or for us to have said, here's how we're going to reach the 17% financial policy guideline, when he's really not had any input on that. So that's also one of the reasons that we're going to make that a practice this year. So scenario number 2, again, we've left the potential spending on the self-funded health insurance, and what I've added here in the blue is the pending projected revenue that's over the budgeted revenue. That would take into account both additional expenses and additional revenues, and that puts us at 16.72% at the end of FY23 if we stick to that plan.
So just about a quarter point below what our perfect target is, right?
Yes. I wanted to give you a scenario number 3 just to kind of show how things will continue to change until we hit the end of the fiscal year. So what we've done here is down in the blue and orange lines at the bottom, I've made a modification to the pending supplemental self-funded health insurance amount to $1.3 million as opposed to the $1.425. There are things that will continue to come in as expenses for health insurance and as revenue. We still have some stop-loss claims that are pending that we should be getting revenue on. Again, those things are kind of fluctuating, but this is just an indication of how a change in any one of these pieces will make a change to the fund balance percentage. I've also modified the projected revenue from the 1.86 to 1.9. Sales tax came in today for the month, and it was about $46,000 higher than our projections. So we anticipate there will be a fluctuation there. So a little bit of swing either way could change this number. And then finally, the orange line. And I want to make it very clear, I'm not guaranteeing this will happen. This is the best case scenario. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. What months did we just get in for sales tax?
We will have 3 more months of collections.
And that will be end of fiscal year at the end of October 31st?
So we actually count the collections that we received through December as into this fiscal year.
Okay.
So the last line, again, the additional unused projected department savings. Again, I'm not guaranteeing this will happen because I've just said that we intend to cover the asterisk items in yellow. But it is possible there will be additional funds within the departments above and beyond what we are covering. We typically move money to our fund balance. We talk about that when we discuss the 5-year model. We put a model up there that has a 3% projected return to the fund balance. This to me is truly a best case scenario, but my point would be if you go to the second page of this particular handout, this kind of gives you the spectrum that we're talking about. 17% is our financial policy goal. Scenario number 1, worst case scenario, 10.6. Scenario number 3, best case, 18.45%. Our goal is scenario number 2. That's what we're aiming for. So our hope is to be somewhere close to that. Not necessarily where we need to be, but as close as we can get to it. But we do not anticipate at this point the worst case scenario. And I think that's what we've been talking about during some of the presentations. So it's just important that we clear that up.
Quick question, Mrs. Perry. What, like, $500,000 of projected savings? Can you just briefly explain what that might be?
It would be any unspent funds that were budgeted and not spent. And that would be across the board in the general fund. It could be personnel costs, as Chief was talking about, vacancy savings. It could be, it really could be anything that you budgeted for us in the current fiscal year out of the general fund that did not get spent for whatever reason.
In your experience with the city here, tenure, has this ever been listed on a budget document?
For many years, it has been listed on a budget document. In the very first meeting, I gave a presentation for a 5-year model. The first page was the general fund with no unspent. The second page would have been general fund with a 3% anticipated return to the fund balance. So we have provided that. I'm not 100% positive, but I think what we returned in 22 was $1.1 million. I've got about $500,000 here of expenses that we are trying to cover. Again, that was as of a month and a half ago. So 500 is possible. I'm not sure it's necessarily realistic, but we can hope for what you call them, blue skies.
Right. We talk a lot about, painting a valid picture, but a realistic one. And I think our goal, our philosophy with that is we'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. But I think we sparked a little too much fear and concern maybe in that 10.6 number the other day. And we've never presented that amount of information this early in the cycle. So the snapshot we gave you was probably a little too pessimistic. So we're just trying to kind of walk that back a little bit and give you the full range and still understand that we're trying to deliver a more on target budget when we hand that off next budget cycle.
Well, that's appreciated. Any questions at this time?
The last page of the presentation is really the second thing that we wanted to talk about, and it is an item that I presented earlier, Exhibit E, which was the recommended loading zone for immediate funding. This is the 25-75 split that we've previously talked about with the over collections of sales tax in the prior year. 2 things to call out here. The first is that the number that the chief has recommended there at the top right-hand side, $367,347.90, is slightly higher than the 25% mark that we originally talked about as an arbitrary split. Top of the page, I've got the note, that's $48,670.06 higher than the 25%. That actually makes it 28.82%. So having spoken to the mayor about these recommendations, we just want to point out that if council chooses to fund what has been recommended for the immediate needs money, one of two things will have to happen. We will have to either modify what is currently in the budget by the $48,670, just moving it from the long-term funding to the short-term funding line, or council will have to figure out how to cut the $48,000 out of this immediate needs amount. That's the first item. Second item is that I've had several questions over the past few days in regards to the long-term funding that has been put into the mayor's budget. While it is definitely the prerogative of council to spend that money in whatever fashion they choose to, it is not necessary to make those decisions during this budget process in order for us to adopt a budget. Right now, the money is sitting in a long-term funding GL account in this particular sales tax fund. And in order to be spent, it would come back to council and council would give direction. By doing that, it may allow us to get input from council on what their anticipated projects would like to be, and we could get some tighter quotes on pricing. Again, always the prerogative of the council to decide exactly what it's going to be spent on at this point, but we would anticipate that would prolong this process, and it is not necessary for us to do that as part of the budget. I just wanted to point that out.
If I could add just to that, and that is that, the mayor, he's watching on YouTube but not able to log on, but we have had discussions about this, and I think his intent with that long term, I kind of think of it more as medium to long term, is that a very appropriate way to think of it is to leave it in a holding pattern for future projects. It would also allow it to roll into next year if that was the desire, but that would give you the ability to have some bigger items to address if there were large, big ticket items. And I think there was also some confusion in the letter that was distributed initially to council where we talked about various options. And I'm looking at the letter, the budget letter, and it's under section 13. And what I did was try to convey this in writing and probably did a pretty poor job. But when we talk about the 25-75 split and big picture projects, and I threw out some options there. And these options are not prioritized. They are not in order of importance. They are just to communicate the philosophy of if you wanted to take an issue and address it, if you wanted 2023 or 2024 to be the issue, the year that you take on the public works, medium duty or heavy duty fleet, council could do that. They could say, Director Morash has mentioned multiple times that, 2005 that occurred. He said, we're gonna fix the fleet problem in public works in 2005. That could be what you decide for 2024. And we just wanted to kind of paint that picture that some of these big items are gonna require a large amount of money infusion to make those work. And it may require multiple years of letting that long-term money grow in that capacity.
The total amount currently that we're talking about is about 1.275 million.
Correct.
That's correct.
In total that we're splitting between the 25-75. Yes.
So that's just the concept, and that's what we're trying to present as an option. Certainly, you guys can do whatever you like, but we just felt that might be helpful in terms of getting more of a capital improvement spending plan, at least the foundation of that, and the concept of that socialized, and maybe that could happen in future years to be more formalized.
And we've also had conversations with the mayor that, quite frankly, we don't necessarily know what we don't know. We're not sure what's going to come up. And instead of having to find funds and be reactive if there is something that presents itself next fiscal year that hasn't been on the radar previously, at least there's an option there instead of it coming from fund balance or some other project being cut in order to move forward with another project.
Councilman Lester, did I hear you asking a question?
Question just with the immediate projects, those are already in the budget, am I correct?
So both pools of money are currently in the budget. So in the Fund 46 documents that you have, there is an account that says immediate needs funding, and there's also an account that says long-term funding. So that's where we have currently put the 25-75 split. If the budget is adopted as is, that's what will happen with it. But I think the chief's preference would actually be to put the items that have been recommended on the parking lot as we progress and pull them off one by one if someone is opposed to any specific project.
And I think tonight we could either have someone request that they be put on the parking lot, or since we have the funds identified, I suppose we could even just have a motion to adopt these changes into the budget with the funding identified, and then specify about the $48,000 if we'd want to go to 28.82% or not, and even have a vote on that tonight. But I think both of those are an option.
Just one other thing that, so I understand a lot, just about all of these, but on some of them were like the partial for traffic signal cabinets.
Happy to,
That's like half of them.
yeah, happy to talk about that if you'd like.
So, some of them are a lot worse than others, and
Yeah.
kind of the same with police vehicles. One just really, I just kind of why.
Well, as we, if you indulge me, and I'm sure that those departments can also weigh in as well, but as we were scoring these and we had discussions at the, as we call it, the Pink Sheet Showdown, we got really into the details and the nitty gritty of what do you have to have, and what are kind of what's the bare, if you really distill it down, what is the bare minimum? And so in having a conversation about the traffic signals, it was, yes, there's 8 of them, but if we could get 4 new ones, we think we could cobble together enough to keep the 4 other ones going for a few years. Now,
Cannibalize.
yes, that's exactly it. Now, I'm not proud of that, but it's kind of the real world that we're living in terms of these types of projects. Is how can we scrape by to get by to buy us some time. And then as far as the police car, I think when we're talking about fleet replacement, any little bit of incremental piece we can make is progress. So I just wanted to make sure we at least had one, and I would like to do more, but that was all we could do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions on this topic? Any other information to present on these items?
That will do it for the things we would want just to do some housekeeping on.
Okay.
If there's anything else that.
Would anyone care to make a request or a motion for funding of the immediate loading zone items in green on Exhibit E?
Sure, I would move to approve all the immediate loading zone projects.
Okay. And would that be to fund it out of the?
The long-term piece, it would take $48,000 out of the long-term.
And so, Councilman Lesser, are you wishing to take the $48,000 out of the long-term to cover the entire recommended amount? Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second from Councilman Schwartz. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, can we get a roll call, please?
Allers, Deacon.
Aye.
Hensley.
Aye.
Lester.
Aye.
Neely.
Aye.
Schwartz.
Aye.
Spencer. Spicer. Wiseman.
Aye.
Wright.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
Not from us.
Great. Returning to committee discussion of the budget, any other comments, questions, topics of discussion from members of the committee?
If I can,
Councilman Deacon?
it's a little bit off topic, but not, and Bill, I'll just find my piece of paper here. If we go back to the parks budget, they have, right now, I think $8,900,000 in the fund balance. And required by law, I think, $1,060,000. And their sales tax revenues are above projection. They've had a hard time spending down their fund balance. They tried last year, we're spending about $2 million out of it this year, and it's still gonna be, up to $5 million. I think we subsidize the parks through our capital improvement tax. I think this year $560,000. And I think in such an austere time, I think I'd like to discuss taking that back from parks this year. They can stand the hit. They have the money in reserve. Not as a precedent for years to come, but just as a discussion this year, definitely this year as a one-time thing. We can discuss it again next year, but it's a citizen's money. It's not like we're taking money from certain citizens and giving it to others. It's going back into the pool of Jefferson City, and we desperately need the money. I don't think the public, I don't think, is going to have any problem with it whatsoever. And I don't think we're obligated by any kind of law or precedent that we have to give them some of our capital improvement, some of the capital improvement tax. I could be wrong. Mr. Molman, am I correct?
There's nothing in the law that requires the city council to provide any portion of capital improvement sales tax money to any particular department. The only requirement is that it actually be spent on capital improvements.
What I was gonna ask about Schwartz.
But we don't need an action to do that, right? Do we need an actual action since it's in capital improvement?
You would definitely need an action because it is listed right now in the mayor's approved budget, utilizing the distribution that was discussed at the beginning of the 5-year iteration. So it would have to remove it from parks, which would go on the parking lot for Fund 46, and either sit there or council would determine where to reallocate it to, but it would require action.
Councilman Lester and then Councilwoman Wiseman.
I just want to point out that, again, that was one of the major projects in the funding that was advertised and the voters voted on as part of why they approved the capital improvement tax. And I would say that's something that the voters voted for and looking forward to those type of projects from parks.
What's the percent? Is it 10%? Is that right?
Yeah.
I think that is true.
I think the voters say the parks tax goes, but we didn't tell them that capital improvements go to parks. I don't think I've ever seen that. And in discussions in the past, we don't promise money going anywhere. I mean, it's discretion of the council. You can get in a big bind. We start promising money way ahead of time. That's my feeling.
I'm just saying it was part of the advertised projects for capital improvement tax each.
Councilwoman Wiseman, sorry to have.
No, that's okay. So yes, it was part of the, I agree, it was part of the tax as we advertised it. And there, before we take that out entirely, I would like to know what Parks has already planned for that, and that may be something we take on at another meeting. But as we talk about that, also, our capital expenditures, can that be like helping out the fleet from Director Marash's perspective?
So the definition of a capital improvement is any type of asset that has a useful life of more than 2 years. Plus software.
So that's why we're still able to do most of it with Public Works.
Yeah. So cars, trucks, equipment, useful life of 2 years. That's the threshold, the legal threshold of the statute.
So the follow-up to that comment would be that if this council does decide to do something different than that, than what was proposed in sales tax G, I would like for it to be considered to think about the fleet for Public Works.
Councilman Schwartz.
I don't really know who I'm asking here, but I guess maybe Councilwoman Wiseman. Say, we heard this a lot on the Monroe Street project. We promised, who's we? I don't know who we is. Was it a council action? Was it a resolution? Was it a suggestion?
I feel like we did a resolution and then, because we had a hotly contested, or I should say we argued quite a bit. I don't want to say argued, but we discussed quite a bit about what was going to be on that list. And then I know that list was approved in some fashion by us before it went before the voters. So that's what I recall, though I think there may have to be some other people involved.
There's a resolution of some type. I forget the timing of it. But yeah, that's a resolution that identified some specific breakdowns of where that money could possibly go.
I know we definitely did that with what we were gonna do with capital improvements over at like different streets, and I know we did that with the fire department. I remember specifically doing that with the fire department. I know there were some specific projects we did talk about.
We can try to find that information and get that out to council if that's priority.
And I just wanna think, like, when it comes to taxation, like the public safety tax, I don't think the council ever specifically said, we're gonna buy this many fire trucks, this many police cars, we're gonna pay for this much in salary. And I think the same abides for the sales tax on capital improvements. The money is still going to capital improvements, so it's still going where we want it to go. I just think we're living in an unprecedented time of incredible amount of sales tax collections because of the amount of federal money that's been dumped into our state because of COVID. And I think, and I'm in 100% agreement with Councilman Deacon that we don't control the parks budget. This is the one area we do control, and in times like these, when we have a significant fund balance, we need to take back what we can do and invest it into equipment that is really the core function of government: streets, roads, and all. So I'm 100% with Councilman Deacon on this.
Can someone explain the mechanics of sort of the situation and how the money would flow or sit or what would happen? And by that I mean, if Parks receives this $560,000 or so appropriation out of capital improvement sales tax, they're sitting on an $8+ million reserve. Which dollars would be spent first? And then what would happen if the dollars that were appropriated out of the capital improvement sales tax were not spent? Do they lapse into somewhere, or?
So the capital improvement dollars for parks are sitting with everyone else's capital improvement dollars in the Fund 46 budget. There's just line items that are called out and designated for those specific parks accounts. So what council would do is essentially say, we want to reduce these accounts by these dollar amounts. We would put it on the parking lot for the capital improvement tax. And then council would either say where they wanted it spent at. They could say they wanted it to roll to the fund balance. They could say that they wanted to put it in some other account for later designation. We could do it lots of ways logistically.
I'm not getting my question out as I wish I could. And in a normal year, these dollars are appropriated, and then they start spending money.
I don't think there's any, from my perspective financially, I don't think that there's any rhyme or reason to which dollars they spend first. It's really more determined by what they have in their budget for each of their parks funds or the capital improvement tax fund. I know Aaron is here and so is Andrew. They may be able to offer some insight into that if there is a methodology for which they spend first. No.
You just kind of touched on it. We have our capital improvement, which in our budget, and we will code those to our capital improvements out of the park fund.
or we'll identify projects coming out of the CIP funds. And we just code those differently and how we had it budgeted.
And then, yeah, I think so. And then if at the end of the fiscal year, there are amounts remaining in that line.
So I was just gonna say, neither one of the pools of funds that they have would ever be taken away from them. So if there is money left in those particular accounts in the capital improvement fund, I would reappropriate whatever's left from this year to next year. It was given to them, they get to keep it. If it's in the parks fund and they had something appropriated for a capital project using their parks fund operating money or sales tax money, if they don't spend that, they have the option of reappropriating it since it's for capital improvements, or it just rolls back to the fund balance. But again, that's the parks fund balance. So spend it or don't spend it, it will either roll forward in budget authority or it rolls to the parks fund balance and they get to reallocate it at a later time.
Do we know for the capital improvement sales tax fund allocation to parks, if there's any sort of rolling balance currently from prior years?
Typically, there is a balance that is reappropriated in almost every account that we have until we get pretty close to the end of the 5-year iteration.
So would that be in addition to the New Year's 10%?
Yes.
Okay.
So in '23, Parks was allocated $560,000. In '24, that is their allocation as well. So anything that was unspent in '23, $400,000, it will move to '24. I do not know what those dollar amounts are at this point, though.
Any other questions or conversation on this particular topic? Any other areas of discussion for members of the committee? Councilwoman Wiseman.
I'm gonna bring up the controversial topic of the compost, and I'd like to put that on parking lot. I think that we should put that money into something better this year, and I would prefer not to put it into compost this year. I just think that we have other larger items that need our attention. And I appreciate the new scenarios that we've been given, but I still have some concerns about that. And I wanna make sure the council is in good position next year and we're not in that pickle.
Okay, so Councilwoman Wiseman has requested to place, I guess to unallocate dollars from the composting contract and put those as unallocated dollars onto the parking lot for other general fund purposes. Is that right?
Yes, for other general fund purposes.
Okay. But you're not requesting a vote on that this evening?
No, we probably need to wait.
Any discussion on that point tonight?
So if it goes to the farm, would that just essentially end staff's directive to, from the last council meeting, to take a look at your extension? But, I mean, if the idea is to, not fund that moving forward, and I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but would staff just kind of be like, well, we probably don't do this right now, but.
My intention is for it to roll over to general fund. I think if council still wants to pursue seeing what options are available, maybe we can get something at a lesser cost. Maybe we do end up with a month to month. There were some options that, were thrown out at the last meeting, though I know it's been just 48 hours since our last meeting, and so I don't know that much negotiation has happened, and so I think that could still come up to council for consideration. But at this point, my personal idea for this is to roll that into general fund, so that way we can allocate it to some of these other expenses. And at a later point, if we want to allocate that money, I don't think there's an issue with it, including another RFP process that maybe starts in January or something different.
Mr. Nolan, you look like you're dying to say something, but I may be.
So the action of putting something like that on the parking lot wouldn't stop staff from continuing to pursue options
And I didn't mean stop as in like, you know, actionable item, but just get the hint.
No, there's no, we have council direction to garner and develop some options for the council to consider, so.
It would also take a vote of the committee to actually effectuate what she's proposing, so. Any other comments, questions, points of discussion on Councilwoman Wiseman's request? Seeing none, that'll be on the parking lot for determination Monday night. Any other topics of discussion brought by members of the committee this evening? Councilman Schwartz.
Yeah, I'd like to put a couple things on the parking lot. The first two is kind of a combination of the active shooter vests for the police department, as well as partial funding of the GPS recreation for crashes. Do you want me to go ahead and identify the fund source, or is that?
Yeah.
I think Ms. Perry realized some savings from the school resource officers allocation of around $70,000. So I would like to, you know, I've had some discussions with Chief Wilde on the vests. I think we can get that down to around the $40,000 range. And I would like to fund $30,000 of the GPS crash whatever we call them, pink sheets, out of the $50,000 requested with that funding source. And then you want me to keep going?
As long as we're able to keep up at the table.
We may not be able to keep up the table, but we'll take notes and get it loaded.
The next thing I want to put on the parking lot with no identified funding source as of yet would be 4 new police cars, as well as the additional $20,000 for the GPS recreation, for a total outlay of $253,200. And then finally, this one I do not have a funding source for, but I think it's a very important discussion, and this goes to the capital improvements fund with the amount of money we have remaining. I would like to put $450,000 for the ARF truck on the parking lot. I think we are about 4 months into the state fiscal year. We have a $500,000 appropriation from the state. There's no guarantees that the state will reappropriate that money if we don't spend it by June 30. I think this is a critical piece of equipment for our airport. And so with the amount of money left over, I think we need to have a serious discussion on finishing the $500,000 from the state, the $50,000 match we've already identified, for an additional $450,000 for the $1 million initial request. I don't want to identify that as the fund source yet. I'd like to talk to the mayor and chief, because I kind of just threw this out there, but those are things I wanted to stick on every day.
Thank you very much. They'll be put on the parking lot, and we can have a vote on each of those things on Monday night. Any comments, questions, discussion on Councilman Schwartz's additions to the parking lot? Seeing none, thank you. Any other topics of discussion, proposals this evening? Members of the committee. Seeing none, well, everyone takes a final moment to wrap their brains. Anyone here tonight to make public comment? Seeing none, thank you. And I'll just remind the room, our next meetings will be Monday the 11th at 5:30, Thursday the 14th at 5:30, and then after that, Thursday the 21st at 5:30. Any other discussion this evening, members of the committee? Anything else from staff? Okay. Well, we'll see everyone on Monday, and we'll call this adjourned. Let's go Chiefs.